What happens when a president steps out of his motorcade and into the life of an 8-year-old street vendor? This story of compassion and transformation will leave you speechless. From poverty to opportunity, see how one powerful decision changes not just a young girl's life, but sparks hope for thousands. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. On any given day, 8-year-old Awa could be seen weaving through the tangled traffic of Ouagadougou, her tray of peanuts carefully balanced on her head. The heat of the midday sun beat down as she navigated the streams of honking cars, calling out to potential customers with the crisp voice of someone far older than her years. This was her routine, a ceaseless rhythm of quick steps, small sales, and fleeting smiles. For Awa, these coins weren't pocket money. They were survival. Every peanut counted because behind her, more than just hunger waited. There was a family depending on her, a life with no margin for rest. She wasn't alone in this reality. Across Burkina Faso, thousands of children like Awa shouldered responsibilities far beyond their age. Many worked not out of choice, but because circumstances left them no other path. According to recent studies, over 1/3 of children in the country are engaged in some form of labor, often in grueling conditions. Poverty was the unrelenting driver, its claws digging deeply into families who lacked safety nets and access to education. For Awa, though, the street was all she knew, a narrow, chaotic stage where survival played out, with no end in sight. One day, the monotony of Awa's grind broke. Across the street, a fleet of sleek black cars cruised by, marked by motorcycle escorts and the faint echo of sirens clearing their path. Most people didn't bother to look up. They'd become used to the sight of President Ibrahim Traoré's convoy sweeping through intersections, the world outside forgotten behind dark bulletproof glass. But Awa hesitated. Her steps slowed, her tray tilting slightly as the powerful procession caught her gaze. Awa didn't know much about politics or the man inside those cars, but for a few seconds their vastly different worlds were only meters apart. Then something unexpected happened. The convoy began to slow. The motorcycles paused, and security personnel shifted nervously. Awa froze as the door of the lead vehicle opened. President Traoré stepped onto the pavement, his figure instantly recognizable in the crowd. He hadn't planned to stop. This much was clear in the hurried whispers and tense movements of his security team. Yet there he was, walking towards the very heart of a scene most leaders passed by without a glance. Awa's tray wobbled slightly as she tried to process what was happening. In the bustling chaos of the street, the president's approach felt out of place, almost surreal. He towered over her, but there was nothing imposing in his eyes. Instead, there was curiosity, then compassion. Traoré knelt down slightly so their gazes were level, and he asked her name. In that moment, the noise of the street seemed to fade. Awa, shocked but steady, gave short, quiet answers to his questions, while his team shifted impatiently nearby. Their exchange didn't last long, but it felt profound. This wasn't just a moment for Awa, it was a decision that broke expectations. Leaders like Traoré rarely paused to notice individuals in such vulnerable positions, let alone engage with them directly. Still, as simple as it seemed, this act carried the weight of context. Child labor wasn't just Awa's story, it was the face of structural flaws that continued to pull families into desperate situations across the nation. Studies have shown the link between poverty and education gaps contributes to generations falling into the same cycle, their potential wasted under the pressure of immediate needs. As pressure built from his security team to move on, Traoré was clearly thinking of solutions beyond soothing words. Raising his hand slightly to silence the voices around him, he made her a promise, simple but firm. He wouldn't just buy her peanuts. He'd ensure she went to school no matter what it took. The convoy moved on shortly after, leaving behind dust and whispers among the onlookers. For Awa, it was a surreal interlude, but it came with a glimmer of something unfamiliar: hope. For Traoré, the encounter wasn't just about one child. It was about addressing the layers of inequality that kept children like Awa trapped in labor. And his promise marked the start of what would become a far larger transformation. The day after his encounter with Awa, President Ibrahim Traoré wasted no time. He called an emergency meeting with his advisors, social policy experts, and local leaders, determined to address not just Awa's situation, but the deeper issues that created it. Sitting at a long table in the presidential office, he made it clear this wasn't about offering a single solution. The goal was bigger, to understand and tackle the systemic forces keeping children like Awa out of school and on the streets. Every child, he insisted, deserves the chance to dream beyond their next meal. His words set the tone for what would become a national investigation into the crisis of child labor. The findings were stark. Investigators uncovered a heartbreaking reality. Thousands of children across Burkina Faso lived lives of constant labor, often in dangerous and exploitative conditions. These children worked because their families had no choice. Many of their parents were too ill or impoverished to provide basic necessities, and a lack of social safety nets left them with nowhere to turn. In some communities, schools were hours away, resources were scarce, and adults relied on their children's income just to survive. The investigation didn't just expose the magnitude of child labor, it brought into focus the human cost of neglect. Traoré made it personal. He ordered visits to rural villages and urban slums to see these conditions firsthand. In one town, he met a grandmother who lived with her 4 grandchildren in a single crumbling room. She shared how, after losing her daughter to illness, she had no choice but to send her oldest granddaughter to the streets to sell bread. Her hollow voice carried the weight of guilt and helplessness, and it was clear this wasn't an isolated story. Across the country, similar scenes repeated, poverty forcing impossible decisions on families who wanted nothing more than to survive. The government's findings also uncovered the dangers lurking beyond financial struggles. Many street-working children faced exploitation, abuse, and violence. Some were drawn into illegal activities, manipulated by those who preyed on their desperation for income. Without immediate intervention, these children risked being trapped in cycles that could shape the rest of their lives. The scale of the problem was overwhelming, but Traoré wasn't interested in excuses. He began pushing for solutions that could bring relief right away while aiming to solve the bigger issues over time. The first step was urgent action. Traoré announced an emergency plan to support families in crisis. Food baskets were distributed to households struggling to feed their children, ensuring that hunger would no longer be a reason for sending kids to work. Free medical care was provided to parents suffering from treatable illnesses that had previously left them unable to earn a living. Temporary shelters and drop-in centers were established in urban areas, offering street children a safe place to sleep, eat, and begin the process of recovery. These services worked as lifelines, providing immediate stability while a long-term strategy took shape. But temporary aid wasn't enough on its own. Traoré's team created a cash transfer program offering small monthly stipends to families who kept their children enrolled in school. These payments replaced the lost income of child labor, offering a way for parents to prioritize education without risking their livelihood. At the same time, the government worked to improve schools in rural communities. Teachers were hired, learning materials were distributed, and mobile health clinics were set up to serve students and their families. Traoré also sought help from international partners. Global organizations stepped in to fund construction projects for new classrooms and dormitories, building capacity for a future where no child would have to spend their days on the street. These measures weren't without challenges. Policymakers wrestled with logistical hurdles: how to reach remote areas, how to fund expanded programs, and how to guard against exploitation of new systems. Yet there was palpable momentum. The combination of immediate support and structural reform showed promise. As plans unfolded, it became clear that these changes wouldn't just touch the lives of street vendors or their families. They represented a shift in what was possible for all children in Burkina Faso. Traoré's bold steps planted the seeds of hope, but what came next would hinge on whether those seeds could grow. Awa's journey to a brighter future began with a moment she had never dared to imagine. When the sound of car engines and voices faded on that busy afternoon in the city, she thought her encounter with President Traoré was nothing more than a fleeting memory. But just weeks later, everything changed. Awa was named the first beneficiary of the president's new initiative, marking her escape from the relentless cycles of poverty and child labor. Her mother, Fatu, watched with tear-filled eyes as government officials visited their modest home. They handed Awa a neatly folded school uniform, a sturdy backpack filled with notebooks, pencils, and a storybook, and promised her more than just these items. They promised her the chance for transformation. Excitement buzzed through Awa as she touched the crisp fabric of the uniform, the bright white shirt and pleated skirt, unlike anything she'd worn before. But beneath the excitement sat a kernel of nervousness. What would school even be like? For years, she had walked past classrooms without ever imagining herself inside them. Fatu, overwhelmed with pride and gratitude, assured her daughter they would navigate this new path together. But Awa knew the challenge ahead wasn't just hers. It was a step into a life far removed from the one she had always known. When her first school day came, the reality of change hit Awa harder than she expected. She gripped her backpack straps tightly as she walked into the classroom, her heart racing as dozens of pairs of curious eyes turned to her. Her teacher, patient and welcoming, introduced her to the class, but Awa could barely lift her gaze from her feet. She hadn't held a pencil since she was small enough to scribble in the dirt in moments of play. The words on the blackboard seemed as foreign to her as the structured setting of the classroom itself. She quickly discovered that while her tray of peanuts had once felt heavy, the weight of catching up with her peers was even greater. Numbers became her first battle. Math assignments overwhelmed her, the neat rows of equations riddled with symbols she didn't understand. She struggled as she watched others finish with ease. Words were another challenge. Her reading skidded to slow stops at unfamiliar sentences. But even in her frustration, there were glimmers of change. The art corner became her sanctuary. Drawing came naturally to Awa, as if years of observing the colorful world from her street corners had given her an unspoken talent. It was there, surrounded by paints and crayons, that she began to relax, her hands creating scenes of markets, sunsets, in the city. Her teacher noticed these small victories and began using art to help encourage her. She reminded Awa that some parts of learning had to start slow, but determination could fill in the gaps. Awa wasn't left to navigate her new world alone. In addition to free meals offered at the school, she received transportation so she could focus on studying rather than long walks to and from class. Counselors provided support to help her ease the transition, listening as she spoke about the anxieties of falling behind or not fitting in. Over time, her hesitation gave way to quiet confidence. Slowly but surely, Awa began to improve. Numbers that once seemed like random shapes started to make sense, and her writing began to flow in smoother lines. Months later, Awa's progress became impossible to ignore. Her teacher sent a letter to the president's office, highlighting her as an example of resilience. Soon she outpaced many of her classmates and extended her hand to help others who were struggling, inviting them to join her at the art corner or sharing ways to solve tricky math problems. What started as small steps turned into leaps. Awa's name was called during school assemblies as one of the top performing students. More than just a success story, her transformation symbolized what could happen when children were given tools to rise above circumstances. With her growing confidence and academic strides, one thing was clear. Awa's story wasn't just hers anymore. It was proof of what could be possible for countless others waiting for their chance. Awa's success isn't just her own. It stands as proof of how compassionate leadership can spark real change. President Traoré's decision to stop that day didn't just alter her life. It addressed a much deeper issue plaguing countless others like her. By connecting immediate help with systemic reforms, he demonstrated the power of thoughtful intervention. But true progress doesn't come from isolated moments alone. It demands consistent effort, addressing poverty, improving education, and providing safety nets. AWA's story urges us to ask, what role do we play in these shifts? Because sometimes small actions can inspire movements far greater than imagined.